This conference will now be recorded.
Joe,
Those are handouts for everybody. I got one. It's like the silverware.
One extra one to confuse everybody.
yeah. Ice cream, benefit districts, beer, it's a little bit of everything on today.
All right, I have 7 o'clock. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our July 18th City Council meeting. I'll now call the meeting to order. And we'll start with roll call, please.
Tripp,
Here.
Daniels,
Here.
Hannah Michael,
Here.
McMoran,
Here.
Lane,
Here.
all are present.
All right, I would invite you all to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, our first item tonight is a proclamation. We have a proclamation declaring chocolate chip ice cream as the official ice cream of DeSoto, Kansas for 2024. We had a special meeting last week. We had a group of very young people in. We discussed it and took a poll, and this is the ice cream that was selected by that group. So I will now read the proclamation. Whereas the city of DeSoto values the involvement of its citizens in community, and whereas the participants of Lernature Camp on City Government Day 2024 selected the official official ice cream flavor for the city for 2024, and whereas the chosen flavor represents or reflects the taste and spirit of our community, and whereas the city of DeSoto aims to celebrate and promote community engagement and joy through DeSoto, proclaim chocolate chip as the official ice cream of DeSoto for 2024. Thank you all for helping me with that selection. That was a fun exercise. All right, our next item tonight is our consent agenda. Tonight on the consent agenda, we have approval of our minutes from our July 2nd City Council meeting, approval of pay ordinance number 977, and approved revised fireworks display for July 19th. Is there any item anyone would wish to remove from discussion or a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Lane,
Yes.
McMoran,
Yes.
Hannah Michael,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Tripp,
Yes.
motion carries.
All right. Our next item is call to public. Members of the public are welcome to use this time to comment about any matter not listed on tonight's agenda. The comments that are discussed under call to public may or may not be acted on by the council during this meeting. There is is anyone here that would wish to address the council under call to public? So please approach the podium. And for the record, would you please state your name and address?
Certainly. My name is David Wood. I live at 118
1925 West 109th Street, Apartment 410. Unfortunately, in Overland Park, not in DeSoto. And Mayor Walker and the other council members, I'm here as an elected representative of the Kansas Silver-Haired Legislative Delegation. And you may have in your packets, which I provided last Thursday through Mr. Mills, this handout here, which I'll be talking from, and also this handout here. And so basically, that first paragraph on your handout called Silver-Haired Legislature talks about the background of the Kansas Silver-Haired Legislature. And we were established in 1982 by a proclamation of the state legislature. And that the second paragraph on your handout talks about our purpose, and is to advocate for seniors, to advocate for the concerns of older adults in our community, and to provide seniors a way of becoming more involved in their activities. That third paragraph talks about our responsibilities as far as advocating for seniors. The fourth paragraph talks about some of our processes, training, timing and process. Next week in Salina, our board of directors and executive committee made up of people from statewide will have our first planning meeting for the next state legislative session beginning in 2025. And so we're already trying to get ahead of the game and begin providing information and legislative suggestions to next year's legislative session. We all like numbers in government, and maybe I'll give you a couple numbers here that you may be familiar with. In the state of Kansas, there are 2,940,546 people, according to the July 2023 Census Bureau, estimated numbers. Of that, 514,595 are 65 plus, which is 17.5% of the state population. If you go to Johnson County, there are 622,237 population. Of those, 102,669 are 65 plus, which is 16.5%. And here in DeSoto, and pulling this out of your economic development publication, there are 6,539 citizens of DeSoto, of which 641 are age 65 plus, for about 9.8%. Okay, so that kind of gives you the scope of seniors statewide, countywide, and citywide. With the meetings that are going to begin next week, and this might be another little thing to remember, whoops. In the Kansas Senate, there are 40 members, 9 of which are from Johnson County. In the Kansas House, there are 125 elected members, of which 25 are from Johnson County. So Johnson County is well represented in the Kansas legislature, and you all may know some of these people through your interactions with them. On the second page of this handout, we talk about the 5 issues that we presented to the legislature last year, and we made progress on some, but not on others. And looking ahead, kind of turning the page to the meeting that's going to take place next week in Salina, our planning meeting, the Johnson County delegation submitted 6 items for consideration for next year. And those were just in quick terms, Medicaid expansion, because Kansas is one of 10 states in the union that has not implemented Medicaid expansion. The second one is extending certain rights to grandparents for caregivers for financial resources. The third one would be a COLA for CAPERS retirees. We're trying to find ways to increase the benefits for CAPERS people. The fourth one would be affordable housing, and that's a big, broad topic, but something to try to iron down next week in Salina. The fifth one is tax relief for property tax, and we started that a little bit with the session last week, or last year. And then the last proposal that we're going to take to this Salina meeting next week is funding for KDOT for senior transportation, okay? You might know that Meals on Wheels is one of the major programs that Johnson County and other counties throughout the state provide, in this brochure right here on the inside page. Talks about information referral, in-home services, nutrition services, caregiver support, and nursing pre-assessment screening. You might be aware that the building right behind us, there's a Johnson County Meals on Wheels operation. We work Monday through Friday there. The county does about 720 meals a day, of which 40 come through your center. And so we're very appreciative for the cooperation we've got with DeSoto in this Meals on Wheels program. I guess in conclusion, on the handout that I gave you, there's a listing of who the 6 members are of the Johnson County delegation. If you have any information or would like to get information about us, please give one of us a call. We're well represented on the state board in that the treasurer statewide is from our Johnson County delegation, and the first vice president statewide is from the Johnson County delegation. So we have a direct line to what's going on in the state. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to take them. Otherwise, I imagine my 4 minutes is up.
Thank you for your presentation. Any questions before Mr. Wood leaves the podium? All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Anyone else under call to public? All right, we'll move on then. Item 3 is old business, and we do not have any, so we'll go to item 4A. Consider ordinance 2618 granting a special use permit for a concrete batch plant near Panasonic.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. What you have before you is a special use permit for a concrete batch plant at the Panasonic site. It's actually already in operation. It was part of the construction that was approved by the Planning Commission, the site plan for the construction of the Panasonic plant. The Geiger concrete batch plant was used exclusively for Panasonic, and they're now asking, because they do at times have some capacity, they would like to sell concrete to the greater DeSoto area, and in doing so they would need to have a special use permit. As you can see on the map, it's south of the Panasonic location by the water towers. So we went through the process of notifying the neighbors. Of course, there was only one neighbor to notify. And they're certainly well aware of the concrete batch plants being in existence, and they're supportive of Geiger's operations. Also wanted to point out Chad Tenpenny's here tonight from Geiger Concrete, and also Todd Geiger, representing the company itself, is here as well. So if you have any questions for them, they are in the audience tonight. This is kind of an interesting situation because typically with the special use permit, we would ask for a lot of information as far as a detailed site plan, traffic study, landscape plans, buffering plans, information about noise potentially, lighting, all sorts of things. But as you can see from the aerial photo, there really isn't any need to pursue those or make the applicant complete that information. There aren't any residences nearby. In fact, the whole area really is a complete construction zone. It's just activity nonstop. And the concrete trucks are really a fairly small part of that. I have gone out a few times and watched their operation, and also actually got on the Panasonic site and watched. They actually, at this point, don't even drive out on Astor Parkway. They just have a direct access to Panasonic from the batch plant. So what they would be doing is utilizing their access point. It is on page 4 of the staff report. It shows that they would actually head south a little bit and then out to Astor Parkway. As you can see where the red line is, that's where the end of the improvements to Astor Parkway will be completed. And so there is a short section that will be maintained by the city of DeSoto. Getting back to the matters to be considered, as far as, once again, the character of the neighborhood, there aren't any residences nearby. There is residential location is Clearview City, which is a half mile to the north, and certainly any impacts that would be from the Geiger trucks have already been absorbed by much of the activity. And actually, now that the road is open, or at least half of it, the transportation networks are actually better as far as getting the concrete trucks to along Lexington or to the east on on the west on 103rd Street. One thing that we always look at is what's the goal for the community? How do we benefit from this? This is a new project or a new business that's being put into town. Now, we did approve a special use permit for a concrete batch plant out on 83rd and Gardner Road. They're underway with their turn lane improvements right now, but they won't be operational for a little while yet. The other thing about this one, while we didn't push harder on some of the items that we typically have, is they're only asking for a 3-year special use permit. So at that point, and they've indicated that they are looking for a long-term solution, and that at that time they would apply for a longer term, but then they would also be subject to much of the detailed things that we would typically ask. And once again, as we went through the factors that we looked at, because they're already in operation, because they're working with Turner Yates, the general contractor, as far as the lighting, the storm drainage, all those things have been already taken into account for their operation. Felt like that wasn't really necessary to require all this redundancy of information, and because it was a 3-year term. So I felt like that was onerous to go down that road. Also, economic impact, potentially it could be 5 to 10 jobs here permanently, and that's a benefit also. As the applicants pointed out, there really isn't a good concrete supplier that would serve the DeSoto area, and that's why they're interested in this batch plant and have indicated that they would like to have a long-term solution when this special use permit, if granted, is up for reconsideration. With that, I will stand for any questions you may have. As I said, the applicant is here tonight. We do have, the Planning Commission did recommend approval to the City Council with 3 conditions. One is the time frame of 3 years. Also that this is something we'd worked out with Geiger Concrete, that they would contribute $10,000 annually to our road maintenance fund. There will be some times when we'll have to run motor grader out there. We'll have to bring in some rock or AB3 or something like that and compact it down. So there'll be some work for our street crews to offset some of the traffic by the concrete trucks, and then also the delivery vehicles as well. And then, of course, they must maintain and comply with all state of Kansas federal permits and regulations. So with that, I will stand for any questions you may have. As I said, applicant representatives are in the audience tonight.
Okay. Any questions from council? I mean, it seems logical to me that the plant's there, and in downtimes that it might as well be productive. It's going to be needed on site to take advantage of the fact that it's there and let them move a little bit of concrete out of there.
Yeah, because in fact, it reduce other traffic from other directions where, for something like the fire station that's under construction or something like that, have a closer source for concrete. It's right there. It's operational. Man, I think it's a great way to leverage it.
Anyone have any questions for the applicant?
I just wanted to know, was there any special need for a larger supply of water or anything for this plant?
I have not been requested. We've not got anything specifically from our water department, but.
Yeah, there is, yes. This
Okay.
plant and the ones that have been stood up to do the 83rd, the improvements, 103rd Street improvements that KDOT is doing. Yeah, we've been supplying a good amount of water to this and the other batch plants across the street as well. So, yeah, we're
Is it on a metered thing or?
yeah, sure, just like a regular commercial customer.
Okay. That's all I have there.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? We're ready for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve a special use permit for the Geiger Concrete batch plant located near the Panasonic facility, according to the 3 stipulations included in the staff recommendation. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? Roll call, please.
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
McMoran,
Yes.
Tripp,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Hunter Michael.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you. Item B, looks like that's yours as well. Consider ordinance 2619 regarding a text amendment for side yard setbacks in the RO district.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. As you know, this is a item that's come up before in different ways with trips to the BZA and also rezonings, spot rezonings. We've had several of those. And after talking with Cameron, the building official, and just all the effort that staff puts into all these individual tracks of trying to help citizens find a way to get an accessory building on their property, finally got to the point where we felt this is enough is enough. Let's just try to find a way to solve this, and brought this to the Planning Commission as far as just for accessory buildings to potentially reduce the side and rear yard setbacks for accessory buildings only. It's kind of very similar to what we did with the swimming pools, but the difference here is the swimming pool setbacks that we came up with, that was for every zoning district. This is just specifically for the RO district. So you can see on the zoning map that's included in your staff report, there's really not a lot of difference in the east side of DeSoto between the R1, which is the darker green, and the RO, which is sort of the pinkish maroon color. They're all intermixed with each other, and there's a lot of lot sizes that are very similar. And the people that are in the R1 don't ever have to come before for a rezoning because their setbacks allow them enough room in most cases, I'm not going to say all, but in most cases where they've just been able to submit a building permit plan to a building official and away they go. But the people in the RO, because they've got a much larger or more significant setbacks, have to go through either a BZA or a variance process, or as you've seen recently, we've had a couple of rezonings, which has now had some spot rezonings, which really isn't good planning practice. So with that, the discussion at the Planning Commission, we did go through several options. One thing that was sort of pointed out was the BZA has set a precedence. They've granted, of the variances they've granted for accessory buildings, they've looked at the R1 district and said, well, okay, if we're going to allow somebody who's just a subdivision over to do this, why wouldn't we allow somebody who's in the RO district to do it as well? So we have that. Also, when we noticed and have not heard any complaints from any of the residents or neighbors about the RO district. In fact, when we've had a BZA or a rezoning application, many of the neighbors have been supportive of that because ultimately they might be in the same boat at some point wanting an accessory building. So there really hasn't been any pushback in any shape, way, or form from the residents that might be affected with this. Now, there was some discussion about what was more important, the side or the rear yard. And it's really the side yard is more of the issue than the rear yard setback. But there have been a few instances. Now, I wanted to go through these exhibits real quick because this is in Arcadian Estates. And you can see here, one of the big problems is where the lateral fields are. And you have to be set back. We've got setbacks from lateral fields from structures. And Cameron and Dale and Drew have been working. They work with the applicants on trying to find a better spot. So in this instance, the 1,600 square foot building, which would be the largest you could allow, and this lot is barely over an acre, it fits, it could work. There's some options. You could even rotate it within that existing RO setback. But if you go to the next slide, which is in Oak Country, their lateral field is just smack dab right in the middle of the backyard, which pretty much negates a lateral or an accessory building without having to move the lateral field or change the drain or the septic system, and really feel like that's a bit of an environmental concern to get into that type issue as well. So you can see how in this instance it's actually about a half acre bigger lot, but because of the setback requirements and where that lateral field is located, they would have to go through a rezoning or a variance. And then finally, this is a lot that's barely over an acre. They went through the variance process twice to get their accessory building and their swimming pool. So you can see how it does on an acre lot. It's starting to fill it up. Now they're very lucky because their lateral field is right where it says front build line on there. So it worked perfectly for them to fit all those things in there. But once again, that lateral field takes up so much room in most instances. And if it's put in a spot that is difficult to move or change, it just doesn't work for the applicants. And therefore, we come back to the spot zoning issues. So we did have this discussion at the Planning Commission and had a couple meetings on it. And the Planning Commission actually is recommending that we change the rear setback, reduce it to 30 feet, and the side setback is reduced to 15 feet only for accessory buildings in the RO district. So with that presentation, I will stand for any questions you may have.
All right, thank you, Brad. Question, did you get any comments when you had the public hearing on proposed text amendment at any
No.
of the plan? Okay, no.
No, and what I reference is when we've had the rezonings and the times I've been to the BZA, that the applicants often brought their neighbors because there was a show of support for allowing them to have this type of use.
Questions from council?
Just one, so as far as the report here goes, you're stating what the recommended setbacks are, 30-foot rear, 15-foot side, but it's not the language that's in the subdivision. We're not approving the page out of the subdivision regs. It's just that you would carry that through into the text and modify the text.
Ordinance
Oh,
does that, yeah.
I missed that? Next page.
Next document.
It's in the.
Oh,
Google
there it is.
Drive.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Got it.
And it's subsection E on the second page.
Got it.
Okay.
Yeah, being somebody that lives in an RO zoned area, I'm on 5 acres. My house sits 50 feet from the back property line. I've been through the variance process to be able to get it there because my entire 5 acres almost is my front yard. So I couldn't put the building in front, so I was very limited. So having been in a situation like some of the properties described here, fully support it and happy to make a motion when the time's ready.
I'm right there with you. I had to go through BZA because of where my septic tank sat. So I had to, and, you know, it was exactly that. The R1 was used as the reference for my BZA. So, and we've been dealing with these since, Rick, since you and I were on planning
Yes.
commission together. So I'm so glad to see a solution.
Yeah.
Have at it, Rob.
I'll make a motion, we approve ordinance number 2619, adopting the Plan Commission's recommendation to reduce the rear and side yard setbacks for the RO residential suburban zoning district, but only to accessory structures.
Second?
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? Roll call, please.
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
McMarian,
Yes.
Hadamichael.
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Tripp.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay. Item C, consider ordinance 2620 rezoning 32855 Lexington Avenue from R1 to C2.
All right, thank you, Mayor and Council. You have a zoning application in front of you for the area that was the former DeSoto self-storage. It's been kind of an eyesore as long as I can recall being here in DeSoto. And finally, we've got some resolution of this and also to turn it into hopefully a business that will help generate sales tax and also property tax values as well. So you can see there's several tracks actually in this rezoning. There's some strange shapes to the whole process or properties, but this is one rezoning for the whole area. There's actually also 2 address points, which Patrick did put in the ordinance as well. But the legal descriptions cover all of these areas. I just wanted to point that out if you had any questions regarding that. As you can see, it's it's an interesting area because either side of the tracks do have a single-family home. Across is City Hall and the Aquatic Center, and then behind is Kill Creek, not Kill Creek Road, but actual Kill Creek, and then you can see the portions of the golf course there as well. As far as the considerations of the Planning Commission, they're all in favor of recommending changing this from an R1 to a C2, because at this point, the structure was abandoned for quite some time, and so the grandfathering of that use could not continue, so it really would have to be, and then bringing it up to our current code would be requiring it to be removed, torn down. There are several times I got calls from people that wanted to buy it, do something with it, try to reopen it as a self-storage, but because it had been abandoned for some time, couldn't go that route. It had to go through the whole process again. And that's basically what Dustin Baker has done with this property, and he's in the audience tonight. If you have any questions for him, he is the applicant. I'll briefly run through some of the characters of the neighborhood. As I told you, the city hall's across the street. Golf courses to the south. There are residences to either side. But one thing about Lexington Avenue is it's our primary corridor through the city. It'd be expected to see more retail, more intensive uses along that road as properties are available, maybe transitioning. So there are two residences that might have some issues with this rezoning and potential retail development. But as I said, it's a very busy corridor, and we'll see nothing but changes. We've already approved some rezoning. Some new commercial buildings have gone up along Lexington Avenue, and I don't see any change in that transition as well. Length of time the property has remained vacant, hasn't been vacant particularly long, but it's had a dilapidated structure for quite some time. So this is an opportunity to transition from a old building that was falling down that at some point maybe would have ended up in front of the council to be removed through a condemnation process. So with that, all the items in the staff report are generally positive as far as taking a building that really didn't have any kind of purpose. It was along a major corridor in the city. It was dilapidated, and we've got an opportunity, or developers saw an opportunity to take this and turn it into a retail site. Don't have any real consideration or items where what actually might go in there, but it is going to be zoned commercial, which is obviously retail business type of usage. One thing also I wanted to point out is flood study has been completed on this item. It did a lot of filling in that area. Joe has reviewed it, so if you have any questions about the flood study, he can handle those for you. But with that, I will stand for any questions you may have.
All right. Yeah, so really, it's an attempt or an effort to rezone the property, or to bring the property in alignment with the prior use and the intended future use. I mean, for as long as I can remember, which has been a long time, there was some use other than residential on that property. It was either vacant or there was that storage unit. So, questions? All right, I'm ready for a motion then.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 2620, changing the zoning of 32855 and 32885 Lexington Avenue from DeSoto R1 residential to low density district to city of DeSoto C2 business general district.
Second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? Roll call, please.
Daniels,
Yes.
Tripp,
Yes.
Hanemichael,
Yes.
Mayor Walker,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
McMoran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you, Brad. Item D, consider Phase 2 agreement with HDR regarding design of wells 7, 11, and 12. Joe, is that you?
Yes. Well, thank you, Mayor, council members. So back in September, we approved the it's phase 1 agreement for HDR to do an assessment of the 6 inactive wells. So there are 3 on the north side and the south side. And so they've completed that study. In that study, what they determined is that the 3 wells on the south side, 1, 2, and 5, not worth the expense to rehab, that their flow would be, I think, less than 100 gallons a minute. So the focus is on the north side, so wells 7, 11, and 12. has the potential to produce a good amount of water. And so the recommendation from the initial study is to drill 2 new wells for 11 and 12 and then rehab well 7. So this phase is to develop construction plans and specifications to put out for bid. The timing would be, given the notice to proceed for design, which would be they start sometime in August. And then early summer, we would have a contractor and construction of the wells either would be completed by the end of next year or early 2026. Their fee to do this is $305,054, and a staff recommendation to move forward with this approval and have the city administrator execute the contract. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Joe on the item?
And then we have a representative from HDR if there's questions in regard
Or
to
any
the study
questions
board,
for HDR?
the design.
Are we ready for a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the scope of services for Phase 2 and authorize the city administrator enter into a contract with HDR in the amount not to exceed $305,054.
I'll second.
All right. We have a motion and a second. And then just for clarification, the money for this is Panasonic fund, is it part of that
Yeah,
water
this
program?
is part of the development agreement that Panasonic provides full funding for these improvements. That's right.
So with that, roll call, please.
Tripp,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Hunamaker,
Yes.
Lane,
Yes.
McMoran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Item E, approve agreement with HDR for asset management program development.
Mayor, council members, thank you. So we've been talking with HDR for, really since I've been here, about looking at asset management. It's more for vertical construction. So the focus, majority of the focus of this in phase 1 is going to be looking at our water plant and our wastewater treatment plant. We really don't have any asset management set in place. And so what this would do is identify the key components of each plant, pumps, computer systems, VFDs, put those into a system that we can use for annual maintenance and then also help us as we move down the road to be able to schedule replacements as needed. And so to do this initial phase is $69,000. Part of it also includes any, I think, linear development that or the lift stations that would come on here and within the year. So we'd have the 2 wastewater plant, the 2 lift stations that we'd be looking at. And some work has been done because we've been trying to set the I'll call it the naming of the components so that as HDR, Burns and McDonnell do the design for the water and the wastewater treatment plant, we're looking at the same nomenclature as far as naming the different parts. So that has been going on a little bit. So the cost of this is $69,000 to start this first phase. It's being funded out of both the water and wastewater maintenance fund. So since we are looking at both plants, we'll look at splitting this cost between those 2 maintenance funds within that budget line item. And those staff's recommendation to approve this agreement with HDR to move forward with the asset management.
Yeah. I would assume this would also help us then account for these costs as we look at rates going forward. Is that?
Certainly, yeah. It would really factor into the full cost of recovery rate structure as we look at that moving forward. I think it's interesting to point out the water and sewer maintenance funds themselves. We created those funds in our budget about 5 years ago, I think, really with this in mind, that they were going to be sort of the seed money for a comprehensive asset management plan for the water and sewer utilities. At the time, we discussed more about the linear stuff. We need to make sure the water lines get upgraded, sewer lines get upgraded, but it also applies to all the infrastructure we're putting in now, you know, the treatment plants, the pump stations. So this really is kind of a first legitimate step. You know, we've had funds budgeted out of these funds each year. I think this year's $65,000 in the water, $35,000 in the sewer fund. Years past, we've just used those for one-off improvements, you know, fires that we had to put out. And this year, I think this is a good step to really start that long-term planning that we wanted to do.
Comments?
Just,
Go ahead.
this is really smart. I'm glad to see it. Not only is it gonna allow us to do that planning and budgeting, but, you know, maintenance and energy consumption account for more of the cost of rotating equipment than what we actually spend on purchasing it. And this will allow us also to, you know, identify when equipment is losing that efficiency or needs to be replaced to keep what are going to be two great facilities when completed operating as such for and serving the community as they should. So fully in support.
Question, so it talks about digital deliverable, and I guess your management system is this iWork?
Yeah, that's right.
So it didn't have anything to do with this scope, but since we're gathering data to put into that system, is that an appropriate, applicable, scalable management system that you're satisfied with? Since we're going to go out and gather more stuff and put into this system, is it a good
Yeah, well,
asset management system?
and that may be to be seen. So as we use it today, yes. But as we develop this and we get more data into it, there may be a need to look at a system off from iWorks that does a better job of accessing the database. But that's the start is to develop the database so that it is uploadable to iWorks.
And then in the future, if you go to a different system, hopefully you can
Yes,
migrate
the database,
data.
the database we can use in any system.
Okay.
Yeah, it's formatted to be able to use in different types of systems.
We have been pretty satisfied with the iWork. We use it for the rolling stock maintenance of vehicles and equipment.
Okay.
And it's
Keep track
modular.
of service intervals
You can
and-
buy, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, service.
I don't know if you recall, there was a pretty extensive evaluation when we decided to use iWorks.
Yeah.
I don't know, 10 years, 8 years ago. I don't know. Steve Chick was the lead.
Steve was the one,
Because,
implemented it, yeah.
because he was using that, he was looking for something to manage permits, and then we wanted something that could work for all the departments. And so it was, for us, a fairly sophisticated selection process that we went through.
That is the system we will be using as we develop this until we decide to find out that it can't handle everything.
Okay.
Any other questions from council? Questions for HDR? All right. A motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the scope of services for the asset management and development phase 1 and authorize the city administrator to enter a contract with HDR in an amount not to exceed $69,000.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion of the motion? Roll call, please.
Daniels.
Yes.
Tripp.
Yes.
Hanamichael.
Yes.
Lane.
Yes.
McMoran.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you, Joe. Item F, receive report regarding the 83rd Street Lexington corridor study.
Yes, Mayor, just by way of introduction, a brief background on this. This is an effort we applied to the Mid-America Regional Council for a Planning Sustainable Places grant to fund this. They awarded that to us, and the contracting services is through MARC. They're funding about $140,000 of the effort. We're funding about $60,000 of the effort. Jointly, we selected Kimberly Horn to do the study for us. It kicked off really in earnest about the first of the year, and we had an open house in February. Throughout the spring, there were online surveys and online comment forms available for public input. We had our latest open house last month in June, and the draft results are ready. And Mayor, with your permission, I'd like to introduce Jeff McCarroll with Kimberly Horn to present the study. And we do have, it's still in draft form, we have a few areas that we need specific feedback on. So I'll let Jeff take it from there.
Thank you, Mike. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, again, Jeff McCarroll with Kimberly Horn, not Kimberly Horn.
I was going to say, do you want me to get rid of the B, or are you going to take it?
I'll address that here. It's the most common misperception of our firm. So I've gotten used to it over the past 3 years here. I will also state that it's been interesting this evening that you all have voted in alignment the entire time. we're going to go through a few things today in which you'll find out the input we received on some different options was split, almost 50-50. In fact, in a lot of areas, we didn't have a really strong showing from what the desire from the community is. Now, all the options we presented are viable. So what we're here tonight is to really talk through kind of what we heard and some of the things and some of the different options for you to weigh in on. So we're not asking you to take any specific action tonight, really looking for a little conversation and direction for you. And that direction could also be, I want you to understand, not to make a decision on some of these options. As this project moves forward, it'll move into more advanced engineering, perhaps in different phases, and you might be flushing those issues out at that time too. So this is really to get good guidance. So as we wrap up this document, you can accept it and it really meets the needs you're looking for. Next slide there. So we'll again review quickly the input that we received back in February as well as in June. And the 4 areas we're seeking some guidance from you on, if you so choose to give us. One would be bicycle accommodations along the corridor. Another would be the use of roundabouts. A third would be, there's some areas along 83rd Street and potentially 82nd Street that have been brought up. And lastly, the intersection of Lexington Avenue and Penner has really had a lot of conversations. We want to talk about where we stand today on that. Next slide, in February, we again met on February 17th. We actually had a packed house here. For those, I know a few of you made it to it. It was a crowded location and got a lot of great input. Right before that meeting, we actually had several targeted stakeholder engagement efforts to meeting with businesses, property owners, et cetera, to get their input before the general public. As that meeting concluded, we actually held an online meeting with all the same materials, received feedback from that. And we presented a couple different cross sections for consideration, get input. One was referred to as the boulevard section, would take somewhere around 95 feet of right-of-way to actually accommodate this. In portions of this corridor, you have that right-of-way. In other portions, you don't. But what this corridor really looked at is 2 lanes in each direction, a median, a sidewalk on one side, and a wider path on the other that could potentially accommodate bicyclists if need be. The other option we took a look at was more of a 3-lane section with that center turn lane, and again, a wider path on one side and a sidewalk on the other side of the road. The feedback we got as we listened to the public on that, we'll go to those cross sections. We actually broke it up by segment as we went through the corridor. And the views began to change as you went, if you will, from south to the east. Between K10 and the railroad bridge that we have today, it was a little bit leaning towards the boulevard section as being the desirable option there. When you go to the next segment, from the railroad bridge to Kill Creek, we started to see that 3-lane section really start to take a preference versus that boulevard with additional width and additional lanes. And then as we moved east of Kill Creek, we saw the 3-lane section really start to take more and more of a tone. And we heard from a lot of the public about, really as you get further to the east, is that 3-lane section even what we want because of the rural nature and how that will likely remain in some of that corridor for a ways. We also had some conversations about bicycles and a little bit of education for you. One of the ways we evaluate bicycles is we talk about the level of stress for drivers related to traffic. And really it comes down to a factor of what's the volume and speed on the roads adjacent to them. So we look to see there are some people who are comfortable driving, riding their bicycle in mixed traffic at almost any speed or volume that might be out there. But that's a very small percentage of people. There's a lot of people who, when you see those volumes go up, the speeds go up, they become a little bit less comfortable. So when we look at things, there's different ways we can look to handle bicycle treatments, anywhere from what we call sharrows, which is a mixed-use lane, where bicycles and vehicles share that same space on the roadway, to bike lanes that we call are unprotected. They're right against the roadway. This is, as we've seen bicycle infrastructure develop over the past 20 years, that was the Cadillac of what we thought 20 years ago, was to have a striped bike lane out there. A lot of people still weren't comfortable for that. when you started to add a space or a buffer between the bike lane and the driving lane, you start to see a lot more comfort and a lot more people willing to ride in those facilities. And now we start to see the introduction of completely separated facilities of different designs along there that the vast majority of people do feel comfortable in because there's a physical barrier between them and the cars. So as we look at that, you look at the speeds, really when we look west of Waverly Road, the speed limit is 35 miles and below. Anywhere from a buffered bike lane to a separated bike lane or a shared use path, those feel comfortable for the vast majority of drivers, and some would still feel okay even in an unprotected bike lane. As the speeds get higher, again, you're looking for that buffered bike lane or better facility to really try to capture what the most people would find comfortable to ride their bicycle on. So we asked the public a little bit about the proposed bike facilities that we talked about. Well over 50% either liked or loved what was being discussed with that side use path, if you will, on the roadway. When they talked about what existed today, still a little bit over 50% in that category. So we started to hear there's good support for the bicycles and providing some sort of accommodation. The question is, what is that accommodation as we move forward? Next slide there. We also had some conversations about roundabouts as a way to handle the traffic, and about as evenly divided as you could hear. There was a lot of sentiment about there's a general support for roundabouts, but they felt that the one that we have might be a little small and tight. And that was a recurring theme we heard through that. Some people preferred to get rid of roundabouts, and then somebody would say we love them. So the conversations we had, the comments we received were pretty much one-on-one, for and against. Next slide there. So we went back in June to the public meeting. We'll show you a couple examples of this. And really, having listened to the public, we refined these sections. And what we presented at that time was basically a boulevard section between K10 and the railroad bridge, with a multi-use path on one side and a sidewalk on the other side. From there, we would transition to a 3-lane section through most of the developed portions of town here, with a multi-use path that continues on the north side of the roadway and a sidewalk on the south side. Once we got to Crest Street, would actually transition that back down to a 2-lane facility, not with a sidewalk and path defined, but with a basically a buffered bike lane that would exist on that segment of road, that rural nature. It could be striped as a buffered bike lane, it could be striped as a shoulder, but gives you some flexibility for how you can move forward from that. So we held that meeting in June. Knowing it was the summer, we actually kept the public comment period open through the 4th of July weekend. So it closed just last week. And we were talking, and Mike and I were talking, we just thought this was a good chance to really get some input from you all. Show some examples of what that boulevard section is. Excuse me. This is the beginning of the corridor, and what we're actually doing is widening out the roundabout that exists today in that location and moving forward with that 4-lane divided facility. The side use path or the multi-use path is on the west side of the roadway at this location. Next slide there. As we transition to that 3-lane, that 3-lane does a couple things. It gives us opportunity for that center turn lane to support commercial businesses and driveways. Also gives us the opportunity to put in medians in the roadway to give protected pedestrian crossings. So you're only crossing one side, one direction of traffic at a time, and you have a refuge in the middle as you move forward from that. Next slide there. And finally, that rural nature, what you see is much more of a 2-lane facility and those wider shoulders. And this scale, you can't quite see all the bike lanes out there, but that's what we're looking at. Following that, we didn't have quite as big of a crowd at that meeting or on online comments. But what we did hear regarding the bike lanes, 7 people wanted actually more, better facilities for that, 2 less. A lot of the people didn't make comments, but in the conversations when they were there, were generally supportive of what was being proposed. Roundabouts, we remain about as evenly divided as we have been throughout. 8 people were for them, 7 against them. even almost some arguments going on at the meeting, but we kept that from boiling over too much. Sidewalks, trails, actually some wanted fewer, and two supported what we had. Again, a lot of the people didn't make a comment at the public meeting. They saw them, they were happy with the concept, but for those who provided in writing or online, that's what we had. And then Lexington and Pinner, some people had some concerns about that location. So now's the part where we'll kind of reach out for some guidance from you all. One's regarding bicycle accommodations. Again, a repeat if you want examples of what we're talking about. The Sharrow, the unprotected bike lane, a buffered bike lane, the shared use path, and some other more higher end protected bike lanes. What we largely have in our current proposal is the bottom two examples, the shared use path and the one to the left of that buffered bike lane. And to remind you again, those levels of stresses as we look at that. So with that, we are looking for some input from you. Current proposal is for that multi-use path from K10 to Karras Street to accommodate the majority of bikers. At that location, again, one thing to keep in mind is that while we don't have for the more experienced bikers a designated lane, we've got 3 or 4 lanes, so there is the ability for people to pass them. There is consideration you can give. Do we want to actually include a buffer bike lane on the entire corridor, or look just at locations where speeds are 35 or less to add that in this location? Both of those might impact the right-of-way needs we have. Again, the right-of-way varies through the corridor, but this is a chance really to see if the council has a preference. It's also okay to delay this decision until plans start to develop and more refinement later. So with that, I'll open up and see if there's anybody has any thoughts, or we could ask.
Question for you. How recent is the data on this level of stress, and does it account for the rise in e-bikes? You know, e-bikes will allow the cyclist to ride at a speed that is much closer to that of traffic. You're riding at 20 miles an hour consistently adjacent to the traffic versus the slow speed. So
A lot of this data really was developed over the past 10 years. Certainly, we've seen that rise in e-bikes, but I don't think it was there when this was fundamentally began. But that is certainly accommodation. At the same time, that comfort of a vehicle passing you at those speeds still plays a factor into that. So
I think a lot of it's that relative difference in speed. You're struggling and you're pedaling at 8, 9, 10 miles an hour, and they're going by at 35 or 45. Or if you're able to kind of keep up with traffic. I think we're going to see, and just purely my pure speculation, that as e-bikes become more popular, and I think we'll see those cyclists are probably a lot less stressed by traffic and more comfortable riding in that traffic, but they'll have confidence that they can ride and keep up with traffic a little bit better.
Yeah, Mayor, I haven't seen the data yet necessarily, but we do know that with the e-bikes, bikers are much more comfortable starting with traffic and moving with traffic because they can accelerate so much easier and faster. So.
I like your point. I think that is a fair point, that we have the buffered bike lane that feeds into a 3-lane section, so it's not. There's going to be much more opportunity to pass a cyclist in that situation than what we have out there right now. You would be able to pass without going into opposing traffic. You could go into that turn lane and then get back over. So I think that's a pretty good point, fair point to make, that because I'm certain that whether or not we provide that facility in the street, that there will be cyclists riding in the street.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's one thing to recognize is that particularly when we're talking about a shared use path, the laws in Kansas, unless it's designated as a bicycle-only facility, you're still allowed to ride in the road, and those experienced bicyclists will do so. Somebody who's a grown man who can ride a bike at 20 miles an hour down a path doesn't want to ride with kids and strollers in that path. That's not safe either. So yes, certainly.
Comments? Anyone else want to throw anything out? Let's kind of tackle. You want to tackle these one? Let's stay focused on the cycling, the bike lanes now?
I was gonna say, I was kind of giving everybody else a chance to talk before.
I figured you did.
They're all looking to you, Rob. They're all looking to me, and there's a reason. I spent 4,000 miles biking on the roads last year. So I biked 83rd Street from Lenexa to Corliss once or twice. Typically I've avoided that a little bit. I will much more bike east to west than I will west to east on that road. A lot of it's speed differential, because coming down that hill I can be at 35 to 40 miles an hour, whereas going up it I'll be at 8 when cars are doing 55. But we've got 103rd Street, Lexington to 103rd Street, Evening Star, which is going to be a nice road, has unprotected bike lanes. We've got a large cycling community in Overland Park, Lenexa, Shawnee. There's a group that starts out Lifetime Fitness regularly every Saturday. They tend to, when 103rd Street and the chance to go to Lawrence is there, will bike across through our community. In looking at the initial proposals, it was 3-lane and then some bike lanes. I think if we're going to do it, we need at least unprotected bike lanes from the city limit. I mean, because it doesn't make sense to have unprotected bike lanes to Corliss. You drop off the bike lanes and then you pick them back up again. Because at that point your bikes are going to come through. Protected or buffered bike lanes are nice. If you go out to Longview Lake and around that area, they have a lot of buffered bike lanes. My wife, who's been getting into cycling and doing some, she is much more comfortable on those than unprotected bike lanes. But then again, she still is doing some biking in the county where there's nothing, from like Kill Creek. And so while she's more comfortable with them, if there is bike lane, at least that unprotected margin, most everybody I know that cycles, and I know a lot of people that do cycle 83rd Street, having just that width without having to worry about the third lane where you can stay in it is substantial. And like I say, it creates that cycling corridor from one edge of the city to the other. I don't think looking at the buffered would be nice, but the amount of space it's going to take as far as right-of-way, things like that, most of the people that are going to be on the roads that are doing the road cycling, and people, I've heard people go like, well, why can't they just use trails, things like that? When you're doing 30, 40, 50, 100-mile rides, you're not going to be on sidewalks and trails. And sidewalks, if you get on those, it's thump, 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 because of all the cuts to it. To where I don't, personally, while buffered would be nice, I don't see it being necessary as much as the unprotected bike lanes give the road cyclists and long distance cyclists the ability to go through. That also provides accommodation to where when we do have things like MS 150, they have a nice corridor to ride through.
Councilmember, to clarify, when you're talking about that specifically, we're talking about like the area from Corvus over in the city where it was 3 lanes, the segment that was 2 lanes with that buffered bike lane. That gives you a little bit, at the speeds that we see on that roadway, I would recommend that in that area.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, buffered would be nice, but being one that I've cycled, I mean, I'll cycle 32 highway over in Wyandotte, which is 55, 60. And as long as you've got that distance and that width for an unprotected when you're road cycling, it's not as uncomfortable. But if it's buffered, that's nice.
Okay.
But at minimum, having an unbuffered bike lane from consistently through. And if we have sections buffered, and that's where if we're talking like when you get into the city, having it buffered for the e-bikes and for potentially some of the other bikes that might be on it that are less experienced would be potentially a good thing.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, I would definitely agree that I'd like to see, at minimum, an unprotected lane running through the entire corridor. I think it does make the difference between making this a, very bike-friendly community versus maybe not getting some of that, traffic, and I do think, when this is completed and, with 103rd and everything else, we do become, an attractive community to bike through, and that, would potentially benefit some of our businesses in town as well. As a much less experienced biker who does sometimes like to go out, I would prefer the buffered bike lane. But, I think I'd also be okay with saying that's something we need to consider once we, look at the specific right-of-ways and look at, the essential cost of what building that in would do. But, yeah, that would be my thought. If possible, I'd like to see buffered. I think it'll bring some more people out to bike. It'll increase that comfort zone for the lesser experienced bikers who might say, yes, I want to go cycling, but I'm not as experienced and I don't want to feel nervous. But at minimum, I think it has to be a full corridor of street accommodated lanes.
And one follow-up, as a cyclist that does long rides, I do plan my routes based upon where I can buy. Because if you're doing a 50, 100 mile route, you have to refill water. Or refill Gatorade. So when I plan a route, there's a couple stops in Lawrence that I know that'll stop at convenience store and spend some money there refilling. Eudora, the Casey's in Eudora is a stop. Gardner, there's some stops. I can tell you exactly where convenience stores are along my routes that I stop and spend money because I have a corridor to get to them, and I will do that. And kind of following up on what you said, that's where probably Corliss to our city limit, I don't know if it would need to be buffered because your less experienced bikers typically are not going to tackle that hill. So it'd be kind of one of those ones of looking at where would we expect the more experienced bikers versus the lesser experience, and that's where within the city may be more buffered in the corridors that would be inside the city. But when you get to, and I mean Corliss to Ravenswood area over by that is in the city, but it's more rural. That's not going to necessarily accommodate your less experienced bikers.
But I think that some of that can be fine-tuned as you advance the plans. One thing about the buffered bike lanes pre-electric bikes, the movement you make on a bicycle climbing a hill is much more pronounced, and that's where that additional width sometimes becomes very much attractive. So now with the e-bikes, you can just push the button.
If we decide buffered, I'm not going to argue against those. I mean, I'll take the extra width.
So one clarification I do want to make, though, when we talk about this, I would still probably lean towards keeping that wider path, that shared use path on one side of the road. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Because that's where your kids are going to typically bike or strollers, things like that. Yeah, they're not going to be on the road as much.
Okay, thank you. Other comments or thoughts?
I think, we've got to have bike accommodation to city limit and to limits and Shawnee and folks that are coming from the east. 83rd is the only eastern outlet opportunity for bikes, and we're going to get it. I think it's got to be accommodated. If we don't address it, then it's always going to be a topic. Right. If we don't deal with it now, it's always going to be a topic. And I think we deal with it in a way that we do it right while we're doing it. If you got buffered bike lanes, you're 4 more feet of pavement, 2 feet times 2. Let's do it right while we're doing it now. And I would be concerned about more of the amateurish, a few weekends a month, especially as housing is encroaching towards DeSoto. You already get a lot of bicyclists that show up at Cause Coffee on Saturday morning. So I would think that we're going to, like you said, we're going to draw people in for that kind of thing. And I'd be more concerned about you and I than Rob. Rob, you're a professional, right? Exactly. I'm more concerned about Courtney and I. And I'd want that buffered bike lane. Let's do it right while we're doing it. Let's don't skimp on 4 feet of pavement, because the right-of-way width isn't going to make a difference. So I think we do it right while we're doing it and do the buffered bike lanes.
Okay.
Where you have the 2-lane section.
All right, thank you.
Over here.
I'm all for a bike lane. I'm very passionate about bikers on the road, especially going up that hill. But I don't really have an opinion for unprotected or the buffer bike lane, as I'm not somebody who will see out there biking. So I guess the buffer would be good for those that aren't as comfortable. And I feel like it gives you that lane that like people like you could pass those people too without getting in the road too much, so.
Well, I mean, that's one reason I would go east to west is there's sight lines coming down that if you're a car, but going up, you're going slow and the sight lines get horrible for people to see you.
Okay.
Just on a side note, keep in mind, bikes do have taillights that have radar that tell when you're behind them, and they now have cameras that will record it if you do something stupid to them.
All right.
And pickups are the worst, especially white ones.
All the city trucks are white.
Or it seems to be that way.
Danny, any comments?
I'm for the buffer bike lane myself.
Okay.
I just like that protection. And I feel strongly, I've been around the bikes a long time and really watch for them. And I think the greatest thing since toothpicks was when they put those lights on. Those lights can be seen a long distance away, those new LEDs. And they're just an attention getter and make you more aware of what's happening out there. I think that's great. And I just like their safety factor that they've done. And I think it's up to us to do the safety factor that we can.
Okay.
That's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. That gives us the direction we need.
All right.
Moving on to roundabouts. So we have about 3 different locations where we're talking about a roundabout in this location. One exists today at 91st Street where that proposal is to widen it and make it actually 2 lanes north-south through that facility. So some minor improvements in that area. The next location is actually at 83rd and Lexington. We got a lot of comments on this when we actually first had our public meeting. Some of the businesses and residents that actually are right to the east there. And we ended up shifting this down, if you will, to the west to provide a little bit more space and operations. So what you see where 83rd Street comes in, if you think of a mall entrance like Oak Park Mall, where the people coming in from the street have the right of way, they can turn left or right. It's that type of configuration here that we're talking about. So there's still gaps in traffic. We don't have a lot of demand on the east leg of that 83rd Street segment up there, but would accommodate those movements in what's a very unusual geometric location as you move forward from there. Moving on down, another one which has been talked about is at Kill Creek, to actually look at a roundabout at that location. I know the signal's still relatively new. It's a span wire signal at that location. And then as we move on, finally at Waverly, a potential location, really as you're transitioning and helping that transition into the developed part of the city. We did receive several comments on these. Most of the comments we heard was make sure their size is big enough if you're gonna do it. There's a lot of comments at Waverly at that location. It does have a little bit more of an impact as you're gonna have to raise Waverly some. And so with that, we're kind of looking for your thoughts from this group here. Again, this is one in which you could certainly make a decision weigh on today. We could wait until you develop some more detailed cost estimates and designs. Or you could pick some or all of these and say, would rather think about that long-term solution potentially as a traffic signal. So with that, open it up.
All right, I'll go first then again, if that's all right. Waverly, I kind of like the roundabout at that location. It's kind of the demarcation between the higher speed and the slower speed. That's a calming device right there. So from there on to the west, we're in what currently we have signed slower, and that I think that makes a lot of sense. It's going to have some topographic challenges. You know, that bank on the north side is, I don't know, 20 feet above the road right now, but that's just dirt, right? So I think it could all be, I think it can work there. Kill Creek, either way, I'm not opposed to roundabouts. A little concerned about grades there, but you know, we have Kill Creek climbing pretty steeply, it seems like, out of that intersection, so it seems like that one might be a little bit of a challenge in that regard as well. But I would say, don't rule out the roundabout at this stage. We can go forward with it, and if we find a signal's a better solution as we refine our plans, then it's certainly easy to implement a signal in that final plan stage. I like this roundabout at the East Y, just because the one concern I had was about truck traffic navigating their way up to the feed and grain. There's an occasional truck that, tractor trailer that makes that maneuver, and I'm not sure if that maneuver is possible. Maybe they're going to have to go around the other way to get there, the ferry and back in. But I think something like that makes a lot of sense there. And then definitely in favor of a little bit larger roundabout at 91st. I think what we have is working, but I think certainly as we're widening, obviously we're going to have to make the roundabout bigger to accommodate that additional pavement width. So I guess I didn't rule out any roundabout. So.
Yeah, Mayor, what I heard was very much supportive of the idea of Waverly, partly because of the transition from the city. Kill Creek, possibly, but as the design develops, that might not be the right solution.
Right.
You like the East Y or at 83rd and Lexington there, and because you're increasing the width on that segment of Lexington, it makes sense at 91st.
Right.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I was going to say 91st and Lexington should have been bigger to begin with, so definitely see that. The one at the East Y makes sense. Kill Creek, I would see that being a lot more fluid, using a roundabout there. Also, for pedestrians, I know being one that not only has had the biking miles but running miles, going through 91st and Lexington as a roundabout, I feel much safer and much more comfortable running through that one than I do waiting for the stoplight and dealing with the stoplight, and is the car going to turn right on me, not turn right on me, pretty consistently. Waverly is one where, being somebody that lives between Waverly and Corliss, first thought was, why? The transition makes sense as far as from 35 to 45, because a lot of people don't pay attention to where that change happens. The other thing, though, that makes me start to go, okay, there's going to need to be something there, is as we look at more development happening, whether it be Arbor Ridge a little bit, but more specifically, potentially Grata and the apartments, where they're going to make a connector to Waverly from that section, to where your people that want to get on K10 are going to go out to Kill Creek. But that's going to become a back way out, and there will be more traffic on Waverly that comes down. And I do know from living in that area, when you come down to Waverly and want to take a left, there's a really big hill there, and if that area is not mowed routinely, sightlines get horrible, even as it is now. So while I was at first going, I don't really see that, as we look towards the future, it makes more sense.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll go from top to bottom. The widening the roundabout is something that I've heard about for a while. I think this is it's an easy win in terms of improving traffic flow there. The East Y I struggled with, and probably because I was looking at this as someone who does go to the feed store a fair bit. Now, granted, I don't typically have my trailer attached when going to pick up feed, but still I was like, okay, wait, it feels like it could create a bit of an awkward flow of traffic coming off that northern spoke of the roundabout, depending on the way people are turning and how well people do, yielding or not yielding. That just, I don't know, it gives me pause because I'm like, I could see that being a potential issue for people who don't do really well at the, shopping mall entrances as it is. And Kill Creek, I could go either way. I know that light has been, it's relatively new, but it has been a point of struggle. It's been one that, every few months I get feedback about it, the timing being off, or why is the left turn not functioning as well. So I think that's something that we, assess, whether it's getting the light right or switching to a roundabout. I'm 50-50. I'd be good with really leaving that one to deeper in the study. I like the Waverly roundabout not only for slowing people down coming into town, because that does tend to be an issue, but also knowing that there is potential development that's planning to hook into Waverly, and that's been, as we've looked at some of the proposed development, that's been a point of concern for me is, okay, what happens to Waverly and all that additional traffic, because people do like to take these alternate routes versus, like feeding onto Kill Creek, which would be the, main entrance.
Go from the direction you're at right now. I'm like Rob on the Waverly one. I'm kind of like, why? But Rick, you make a good point about. I hadn't really thought that's kind of the transition point in speeds. It's also a gateway feature. So in general, I'm a fan of roundabouts. They're continuous flow. They're low maintenance. In fact, Joe, maybe our public works director, city engineer, can kind of weigh in on an opinion on some of these as well. But I generally. The roundabout's not the solution for every intersection by all means, but in the intersection capacities and sizes that we have, I think there's a lot of merit. So, I can go either way with that one. I think Kill Creek's a no-brainer as a roundabout for continuous flow, not having to deal with intersection upgrades and improvements and signalization that comes along with that, and timing changes and automation that comes along with that. When Arbor Ridge was first being proposed, it came with a roundabout option for Kill Creek. So that goes all the way back to the original proposal for Arbor Ridge. So I think that one's a no-brainer. The East Y, I also think is a great solution for untangling that a little bit. Penner obviously is not the place for that to happen, but Mayor, I think a little bit of geometrics, run a lot of auto turn models on that one. I think you can fix the geometrics on that.
I was talking to Mike, since we do own the park, and we have one house there, it's probably possible we could continue that leg and then swerve it back in.
Swerve it back around.
Yeah.
Because it's all open to the north of that, and I think as we
we're
refine the
working
plans,
geometrics.
we can come up with a solution for that location.
Yeah. Okay. And then, the 91st Street, that's an expansion of what we got. We were dealing with, a 4-lane to 2-lane transition in conjunction with the roundabout and the constriction of the right-of-way and not wanting to buy additional right-of-way at that time. But now if you're going from 4-lane to 4-lane, then you'll rebuild the roundabout accordingly instead of having to make the roundabout also make the lane transition. So, that'll just be a continued enhancement to that intersection.
All right, thank you.
Victoria?
I'll start where you're at. Yeah, I agree with the widening. I feel like it should have been widened since the beginning. Then this one, I go back and forth with it because I take that exit all the time, and especially like leaving to get onto 83rd, it's always a cluster and it's a lot of people and you just gotta go when you gotta go. So I think if you can change it like you guys were saying, like a little bit. And then Kill Creek. So all the feedback I've heard about Kill Creek is nothing. Don't have a light, don't have a roundabout, go back to the way it was. Everybody needs it, from what I heard. And in general, I don't like roundabouts, and I don't agree with having roundabouts, but, so I'm iffy again, but I wouldn't want one there. And then Waverly, I do like the idea of reducing the speed, but there is that hill there, so do you think like people coming down that hill, they come over and down, that's gonna cause an issue with people just not stopping in time?
That's Councilmember, that's where that design and also lighting for that roundabout will become important. So you can address those issues as that design develops.
Thank you. Danny?
I definitely like the idea of widening on 91st. Waverly, I wouldn't mind a roundabout there. As far as the Y down there, I think there's another solution for that problem, so I'd be against a roundabout down there at the Y. And I think for the time being on Kill Creek, I think that probably as design goes and the way it is now, I think that we can make some traffic changes and light changes and timing changes. I think we can deal with that for a while. I don't want to see a roundabout there.
Okay.
So to summarize what I heard from the group, it was somewhat of a split decision. So I think in some of these locations, we'll talk about options in our report that can be resolved as you move forward in design. Noticeably at East Y and Kill Creek, Waverly was maybe a little bit more supportive of that location, but in those locations, I think that's, if I misspoke, please let me know.
I think that captures the comments based on my recollection.
Will your report take a look at that different geometry for the Y? Or would that be something that would be later stage?
It would probably be in more detail in later stage as you refine that, but we'll make mention of that and see if we can't make some little sketches there. So,
thanks.
Okay. The next conversation we want to talk about is, it was a proposal brought up at our first meeting about 82nd Street, and it really impacts some properties on 83rd Street, and just kind of set out a little bit of a conversation on this one as well for you. So a concept was presented at the meeting to actually realign 83rd Street to 82nd Street, which is, I'm sure many of you are familiar, it's a small, narrow roadway, still county width of right-of-way, about 40 feet of right-of-way. Much of it is in the current floodplain as well. But to take that property through there and to lay it out accordingly, what we'd estimate is probably about 6 properties or buildings that would have to be taken in part or in total to make that work. Also a lot of construction to actually raise that up out of the floodplain so that it would be a good, safe road in the majority of the weather conditions. One of the reasons this came up, if you go to the next slide, is actually has to do with about 4 properties there along 83rd Street, just north of Laramie Street. We've got an issue on 83rd Street where we've got a crest of the curve, if you will, the top of the hill. Actually isn't in a good location for sight distance along Laramie right now. If you're looking to coming out on Laramie, looking to the left, it's kind of tough to see far enough for oncoming traffic. So as we look at this, we think there's going to be a need to lower over time, kind of shave off the top of that hill. That comes to play with some of the residents that are on the north side as well. They already have driveways. Some of the driveways there actually aren't built to standards. They're steeper than what we typically find in residential driveways today. And they've got restricted and even worse sight distance in some of those locations than at Laramie also. One thing, it is in our other figures, it's and on the online, it doesn't show up on this diagram right here. When those lots were platted, they were platted with an additional access easement to actually gain cross access between the different parcels, which actually supports the proposal that we've shown here to combine those driveways, if you will, into one intersection, more of a standard intersection, if you will, at Laramie. If you go on to the next slide, and this is really where we're seeking some input. There's not a right or a wrong answer here. There is some impacts, one way or the other. The current proposal, we're talking about lowering the grade on 83rd Street and to provide better access for those homes using that cross-access or shared access easement for those 4 properties on the north side to give them a safer access onto 83rd Street. Another option could be to relocate 83rd to 82nd, which would decrease the volumes and really slow down some traffic on there. It would require significantly more right-of-way to accommodate that, and some buildings would likely have to be removed. and possibly some parcels total takes, and would have to raise that up out of the floodplain. So this is a big issue. It was something that came forward with your citizens. It was a well thought out idea. It is worth a conversation. And we wanted to bring this for you to get some input from the council.
Jeff, do you know how much that has to come up, that, what level that floodplain is relative to that current road?
I think
Do you
it's,
recall?
I think it's a couple feet.
Yeah,
791 is
Okay.
the
Yeah,
floodplain
it's,
over.
it's not 20 feet.
Yeah.
It's less than that, but.
We'd probably be bringing up 4 feet or whatever, something less than 10 feet. It was an intriguing concept when I read about it. The thing that I don't like about it is it puts a pretty hefty impact on that Cedar Junction community. I mean, in terms of total takes on houses out there, and then I think that's Penny's some sort of
The shop.
shop there. At least in this concept, it does. So it's
You're referring on the
The
eastern
far
end of
east.
that?
far east end. Yeah,
Where the red X
the
is.
challenge to get over there is it's pretty pricey in terms of displacements and so those are my two concerns with this. One is the displacing a business and 4 residences, and then the cost of whatever that is, a half a mile fill, roughly 4 foot tall and 40 foot wide.
Okay.
I do know, I've been out to the residences there. I've talked to, I believe, 3 out of 4 of the residents. One of them has the steep driveway. The reason it's steep is because there's utilities underneath of it that weren't going to be moved to make it happen. Water and sewer and things like that, which means if we're going to lower it anyway, that's going to be moving of utilities most likely anyway. But they are pretty much 100% unanimously opposed to the shared driveway concept. And if you actually go out on site on their properties, what you realize is that pretty much destroys over half their front yard. To where instead of having a front yard, they have a little piece of grass before you have that shared driveway. And that will definitely impact the values of their homes, impact their ability to basically enjoy what they've got, and has substantial impact to them on that front as well. So I'm not necessarily a fan of using a second street, but I'm definitely not, after being out at their properties and seeing what that would do to them, not a fan of this either.
Okay. And this could be one of those areas that we can continue to explore as design progresses to see if there's another accommodation that can be made.
Yeah, because I mean, it literally takes away more than half their front yard. And that would put it to where it's seeming like it's really close to their house.
I definitely appreciate the concerns with the residents and the significant impact this would be. That said, I don't think the 82nd Street, while an interesting concept to explore, I don't think that's a viable concept to move forward with. Looking at, 6 partial or total takes and the floodplain concern and all of that, I definitely would not be in favor of that option. I would be in favor of continuing to explore if there's, a better solution for the 4 impacted residents, that are across from Laramie. But I don't think 82nd Street is the right solution.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's gonna be a hard issue to address. This is not there's not an easy answer to this one, so you just gotta fight through it. This shared driveway, I was trying to scan through some areas. This shared driveway situation has also been one that's been used, I believe, along Flum Road on some widenings down in Olathe because of a similar kind of situation. You end up with a retaining wall and a shared access situation. But yeah, this is just gonna be a hard one to have to work through. I don't know that the 82nd Street, well, it was a really interesting idea to flesh out. It seems to do more harm because of affecting more people in a more detrimental sort of way. But you know, this is one where there's going to be unhappiness, but we gotta find a solution. We can't just not. So I think the 82nd Street is just too impactful.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm kind of on the same page. Both are interesting concepts and seem like they would be nice in a perfect world. But for 83rd, if what Rob says, that people don't like that idea because they're the ones that are impacted, then I'm not for it. And then 82nd, yeah, that's just too many people that are being affected by that. So.
Okay.
Danny, any comments?
I don't like either one of them. Okay?
I think we're all on the same.
Yeah, I had hoped to find a better solution as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't like either one of them, so
All
no.
Okay.
And I would at least ask as we move forward, include the residents' input, at least those four especially, in what is being discussed.
Okay.
To where they don't show up at a meeting at some point and go, you're gonna do what to us?
Certainly. All right. Thank you. And I think we have one other area of conversation, and then I think I've taken enough of your time this evening. And that has to do with the Pinner Street intersection. And just to be clear, there's a lot of questions on what was being proposed and contemplated at this location. This is also one that doesn't have an easy solution. With the grades that are out there, with the development that's occurred on the other side of the street, with the school activities. We heard a lot about this early in the year about this being a bottleneck and some issues of concerns. The proposal as stands today actually includes what we could foresee eventually being that signalized intersection. But in red there, if you will, what you see is a raised median. So the exit coming out of the school becomes really a right only and brings you to the traffic signal. It will require, as you move forward, more negotiations and conversations with the school on how they're going to operate and facilitate that. But there wasn't a lot of great solutions here that we could delve into at the level of study we're at. This is a location where this is probably a viable option. It might not be ideal, but it does prohibit people turning out and not turning left out of the school, if you will, onto Pinner at that close location to Lexington, and gives you some opportunities there to provide a little bit more controlled and safer operation. This is one, again, as you move into design, I think keep an open mind that there might be another solution that comes forward. But we want to bring this up to you for if you had input or thoughts to share. We did look at a roundabout at this location. It was difficult to make work. We looked at moving intersections completely, but we have some great issues there. And now the new development that has just recently been built here on the other side of the road complicated that. So we're presenting to you what our current plan is. I would say be open-minded that this may well change as the design progresses. You get some harder survey. We spent a little bit more time there. But if you had input on this location, would certainly take it. If one of you has a great solution in mind, I think this is one in which Joe and I have tried to figure out. We haven't got there yet. But we certainly want to just present you and let you know this was one of the areas we probably got the most feedback from the community on.
Was one of the options looking at reconfiguring the whole parking lot area, moving the school access to that north driveway and just redo the parking and the on-site flow instead of trying to fight it into this same solution we have right now?
I think that's a viable option.
Redo the whole school parking lot and redo the whole school flow.
That's where my thoughts
Yeah,
Yeah, because
it's kind of like you know, your point about it over on the East Y, take that road through the park.
Yeah.
Here, we need to redo the parking lot and the school access.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the whole reason, I mean, this was the 83rd Street corridor study, and the whole reason we extended it to K10 was pretty much this intersection specifically. And looking at this, I mean, one of my first questions is, what do the buses do? Do they all come out and take a right?
Yes. Or you modify on-site to have those who turn left circulate another path.
Okay,
That would be an on-site change with the
And
school.
what path? Because, I mean, that's part of the thing where the buses are coming out and dealing with the school traffic. This still doesn't seem to solve the problem and solve what we're dealing with that intersection, which is where, kind of like where Kevin was going. I think it needs to go back to the drawing board and
On the school side.
think outside the box, think cooperatively with everybody involved, which would be the school, and go, how do we solve the true problem that is this grown together in a spiderweb convoluted way Pinner intersection that made us put this section of the road into this study specifically to deal with how do we deal with the buses? How do we deal with this? Let's figure out fixing this properly and not just throwing a median in there.
Because if you can eliminate the tie that exists right now, that just becomes a, you know, a normal T, you know, an oddball T intersection, and then you have another T intersection. Now you've got movements that are there, but I think you got to look at that whole school circulation and fix the problem there.
Okay.
Yeah, because like the buses, they all come into that section by the school, they're pointing that way.
Yeah, pointing north.
So redirecting them means they either all have to come out, take a right, go down somewhere and turn around,
So they would all come out.
Or-
Everybody coming out would have to take
or
a
they'd
right.
have to go back through the parking lot, around the school, back to DHS, out another.
Well, Jeff, you're not talking about, they could go left on Lexington.
Yes, they could. They'd be a
Just
school.
can't
They can't go
That'd be
left
a-
on-
They just can't go
Can't
out
go
there.
left on Penner.
Yeah.
But that still doesn't solve the congestion issue that ends up being at that time of day either.
Yeah.
I think Kevin has the right idea. I think it's gotta be looked at with the school parking lot and the school flow, because this is not really fixing it, and I get why it can't be fixed at this point. And so there needs to be a broader view to say,
Yeah.
okay, what needs to happen at school and so forth to provide something that is functional.
I would say without changes to the school property, this is probably the best mitigation we can do right now. But you're right, ideally changing some of that within the school would be that.
And I
We
know
can find a
this-
better
I
solution.
know the school in the past has looked at alternatives and possibilities, so they've looked at reconfiguration, trying to figure out how they can handle some of the problem on their own, including purchasing the house next to them. The only thing at the time, the house next to him was wanting an exorbitant amount for what the school district was able to do. But that's where, as we're looking at the total solution, and we start to partner with the school district going, okay, let's figure this out. I think it needs to look more at a total solution with the school district.
Okay.
Yeah, if we'd be talking about taking multiple houses to do 82nd Street, we may have to take a house here to fix this problem.
Did you get enough direction on that, Jeff?
I did.
Yeah, it's not easy solution.
No, they're not easy,
Yep.
but they gotta be fixed.
Yeah.
Council, I'd like to thank you for your input this evening. It was quite helpful for us. We'll start to shape up our final recommendations on the plan,
All right.
and it'll be presented to
You don't
you.
want to talk about the costs here?
We can, oh yes, that's it. End on a high note, right? I will say these costs are very preliminary in nature, just because at the scale we're looking at, but just the recognition that this is a big corridor, and that you could easily surpass $50 million in funds to build all of this. not necessarily even including the right-of-way needs you might have. One of those issues to understand is it also isn't likely a project you're going to build all at once. It'll be built in phases. There are some natural bigger phases you could think of. As we've laid out, there's K10 to that railroad bridge as one, that boulevard section, if you will. The railroad over to about Kill Creek is kind of that, hits a lot of that commercial activity area that exists today in DeSoto, and then heading east from there. So as you look at that, and we'll finalize and document our report, I think the next steps, this is a good first step to start defining that vision, but advancing then a preliminary engineering study to start to break down some of those in more detail, to understand some of those impacts, to refine the cost, is kind of that next step. And that starts to begin to position you where you can apply for federal funds, state funds, regional funding options. It's rare a project like this ever gets built with one funding source. They're normally layered through multiple things. So that part of the intent of this report is to set you up and get you ready to start thinking about those next phases too. So.
Quick question on costs. With respect to that railroad bridge, did it include replacement of that railroad bridge in the cost?
Yes, Mayor. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions from council?
Did you engage the school district at all on the Pinner?
I believe we reached out to them. I'd have to go back and check to see if they showed up at our stakeholder meeting, but I believe our public engagement staff reached out to them, yes.
But no specific meeting with them?
It was, I'd have to go back and check my record to see if they were at our meeting we had early in the process, so.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
All right, thank you.
Item G, discuss request from DeSoto Days Committee for a common consumption area in the Uptown District.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This item is a response to a request from the DeSoto Days regarding establishing a common consumption area in the Uptown District. I had met with representatives from the DeSoto Days Festival who are in the room to kind of talk about a solution to an issue that came up last year. Mike, if there's a PowerPoint, if you would bring that up. And so, Mike, if you go to that second slide, this is kind of the why slide. So in 2023, the DeSoto Days Festival added a margarita vendor to their festival, and due to state restrictions, they had to have two bars that could not share the same space. So if one person wanted a margarita and the other person wanted a beer, unfortunately they couldn't sit next to each other. This led to some confusion with guests, and so DeSoto Days came to city staff to try to find a solution to allow the guests to kind of walk between the bars. The solution we came up with in consultation with the Department of Revenue, who's in charge of alcohol control in the state, was to come up with a common consumption area for the larger kind of uptown district. Mike, if you go to the next slide. So what is a common consumption area? In layman's term, it is a designation of an outdoor and indoor space where people can possess and drink alcoholic beverages that is not covered under the usual liquor license. So these tend to be kind of outdoor areas. What you would think of like Lenexa City Center, downtown Shawnee would be another example. It's a common misconception that that means that alcohol can be sold on sidewalks and streets. Really what we're talking about is the consumption of alcohol in an area. Any sale of alcoholic beverages on the sidewalks would need to have a special event permit, like you would see right now going on in DeSoto Days. Mike, you can go to the next slide. I could spend a little bit of time explaining this, but I think Topeka did a really good job. They are kind of the model when we talk to the state of Kansas. So they have kind of a minute-long video that I think would help you guys get a feel for what this looks like.
Just a down arrow ring?
I think it is.
The Topeka City Council approved the creation of two common consumption areas, or CCAs, in downtown Topeka and the Noto Arts District. These CCAs became operational on April 15th, 2024. So how does it work? When you enter a CCA, you'll notice pavement markings and signage that indicate the zone's boundaries. Once inside, simply head to a participating establishment and purchase your drink. Establishments will have signage that states if they are participating in the CCA, and you can always ask your server. And once you purchase your drink, you can then take it to go. The drink cannot be in a glass container and must have the business logo on it. From 8 a.m. to 11:59 p.m., you're free to stroll through downtown or Noto enjoying your beverage. Now remember, when you finish your drink or are about to leave the CCA boundaries, please dispose of your cup in a trash can. A few important things to remember: you cannot bring your own alcohol to either CCA zone. And some businesses within the CCA might not permit you to bring in beverages from another establishment. Enjoy your time and drink responsibly.
So I hope that kind of gave you guys an understanding of what you're thinking about when you're thinking of a common consumption area. One of the other areas you might be familiar with, kind of the closest area, is the Lenexa City Center. If you've been in that area, you'll see kind of the blue stars. That's kind of the boundaries of the district. Mike, if you go to the next slide. This is kind of just a map kind of showing you where some of these common consumption areas are. You see a good chunk of them are in Johnson County, but they're kind of spread out throughout the state. There's about 39 of them. And the two closest to DeSoto are the Lenexa City Center and downtown Shawnee. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So there are a couple steps that that the city would need to do in order to establish a common consumption area. The first one is kind of 3 steps. So local control. The first thing is that the council would control the regulations on this. So council could set the hours of operations, regulations. One of the ones that's seen very commonly in communities is not allowing glass bottles in the district. But you could set rules and regulations based on how you see fit. Another one is getting the state to approve the permit. The regulations would be set by ordinance, and then what we would do is we would submit an application to the state of Kansas, who would then approve the application based on the ordinance. And then finally, the city would announce the district and invite businesses to participate. So, Mike, if you want to go to the next slide. So if you're thinking about local control, like I said, the city would set the regulations. So per law, this could be done by either a resolution or ordinance. We would probably do this in an ordinance. But the ordinance would basically define the boundaries, the hours of operations, requirements, and then general community requirements for not having glass, any restrictions on closed streets if there were special events. That would all be outlined in the ordinance. Mike, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just some signage. This is one of the major things that the state outlines. The boundaries must have clear signage. So this is an example of signage from Hayes. You see they just stuck it on an existing stop sign. Another one, Mike, on the next one is what you'd see on sidewalks. So the one on the left is Hayes and the one on the right is Lenexa. We would just need to outline in our ordinance what that would look like and identify that on the signage. Go ahead and go to the next one. So the regulations for obtaining a common consumption permit, basically it's a complete application with ABC and the Department of Revenue. There's a $100 permit fee, and then the city would actually be the permit holder under this thing. So we would have the restrictions and the requirements of what would happen. And then these permits are renewed on an annual basis. So if it's approved, we renew it annually. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This one's not as pretty, but essentially these are kind of the regulations. So anyone that would be selling in the district would need to have a permit to sell alcohol, whether that be through the city with a CMB permit or a permit from the state to sell other licenses. Basically, the permit would allow patrons to flow freely throughout the district, but it would restrict access on those boundaries. So you couldn't leave the area with a beer or an alcoholic beverage. The licensing responsibilities, basically, we would basically require that any businesses that would be operating, they would have identifiable cups. So you saw in the video, they had the clear cups with the individual logo. So if, for example, we think about Force of Nature having one, if they were part of it, they would have a specific cup that said Force of Nature or whatever their logo would be. That way, if there were violations, if ABC did come and check, they would know exactly which vendor was in violation of the common consumption, and the ticket would go to them.
The vendors could be brick and mortar or mobile?
Yes, yeah. So if you had a special event, you could,
Like DeSoto Days?
Yes.
Somebody came in and set up a food trailer that was serving, they could apply for it then?
yeah, they would just need to have an individualized cup that said insert vendor right on there. There are some liabilities that I want to identify. Most of them from the city standpoint would just be not complying with our regulations. So if we said in the ordinance we had signs up and we didn't have it up, if we had sidewalk marking as a border and the sidewalk marking disappeared, that would be something we could be in violation with the state, which would be a fine. I've spoken with our public works operations manager, who's talked to other cities, and we've gotten kind of ideas and prices on what that would look like. Not only do the signage, but also the markings on the sidewalks. We would do, on all the major intersections, they would have signs, and then on some of the smaller intersections, we'd have sidewalks that would be updated and checked on a quarterly basis. So there are a couple proposed maps that we're looking at. In your packet, I have kind of the preliminary map I was looking at. This one being the first one. It's an original map. It is more tight. So basically it runs on a little bit east of Shawnee Street and encompasses the two beer gardens from DeSoto Days up to the alley and then down on Shawnee Street to Wea. This is kind of my understanding of what would happen on a general basis. Outside of DeSoto Days, this is what the festival would be. You'd see kind of Force of Nature having some kind of event. This would be the district. I have kind of talked to the businesses in this area, and they've all received at least a letter from me basically explaining what this common consumption area would look like. It does exclude to the west on Wea some of the government buildings, so the public library, the post office, and the school district building. It also does exclude Cause Coffee and AB Creative. There was another map that was actually brought to my attention today by our public operations manager that's a little more comprehensive and more robust. It does follow the DeSoto Days outline. And so this would be kind of encompassing all of DeSoto Days. All of these areas would be where they would be vendors. It would be kind of a one-time, once a year thing where we would have vendors as far south, if you look at Shawnee Street, or as far as Wea or Peoria Street. But it is an option. So Mike, you can go ahead and go to the next one. Kind of before we get any further, are there any questions or anything about anything we have, anything I've presented?
I have one question. Was there any of the state statutes on alcohol and church properties?
So each individual property owner could restrict access. So just because you're in the district does not mean you could allow access. You could allow alcohol on your property. Does that make sense? So let's say that
Would the sidewalks be considered their property, or are they community property at that point?
It'd be community property, yeah. Yeah. So if the church wanted to, if they for some reason wanted to allow alcohol in their building, they could. But if they did not want to, they could basically, if anyone entered, they could say you need to leave with the alcohol. So it's up to the property owners to describe if they want people to enter their property with alcohol.
Couple other questions. You mentioned you had sent letters to the businesses. Was there any feedback thus far?
Yeah, so I sent letters. There was some feedback. The majority of them, almost all of them, were positive. There was some concerns about trash in the district, and so when we walked the district this morning, we kind of identified 6 places where we want to put permanent trash cans in the district, just to allow people to dispose of their cups as they're leaving the district. There was just kind of general interest in the district of what that would look like, what that would mean for their business. Would they be required to allow someone to walk into their business with alcohol? And I explained to them, no, that's up to you, the discretion of the business. And then the hours of operations. There were some conversations about, if we wanted to restrict it to after hours. So some of the businesses, 9 to 5, do we want to start the common consumption area at 5:30 or something like that? As kind of a buffer between when people are operating business and when people will be consuming alcohol. Those were kind of the big questions that we got from the vendors. But overall, like I said, there was no real strong opposition to it, but there were concerns about those kind of things. So like I said, I did walk the district. I dropped off kind of handouts and to the ones that were open and emailed the businesses I could find, just so they got a feel for it. Haven't really heard anything But outside of that, those were kind of the major concerns.
Two other things. One comment, you know, I mean, we're talking trash, but we're requiring plastic cups, so let's make sure those are recycling bins.
Yeah.
And
Good
then
point.
with the kind of larger district map that you showed, and we're able to do that as like a event-based action. So like there's the core district that may be more continuous, and then this would be able to be like activated for DeSoto days, but not necessarily the size of the district on an ongoing basis. Is that correct?
Well, and following on that would also be, is this gonna be a 365 or 65-day year district, or is this one where it's more event-based? I know for DeSoto days, that larger map would then encompass the carnival, which with all the kids may not want that, to where more consolidated. So kind of following on what Courtney was asking was, what are we looking at timeframes as far as on, off throughout the year?
Yeah, and that's definitely, that's one of the questions I have for council is kind of what parameters would they like to set on it? So you could have something set up where it could be as simple as a Friday, Saturday where the common consumption area is open. Council sets the timelines of when that is. Generally speaking, if you look at the districts, they are Sunday to Saturday, 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. But it depends on what you would like to do. The signage we would provide would basically lay out when those hours are. We would specify that based on whatever council's prerogative is.
But just to add, when we do the ordinance, you have to designate what the consumption area is. So I don't think you can, change that regularly. You could year to year, but once you set that area, then it's pretty well set.
Yeah, it's set by ordinance or resolution,
So it wouldn't fluctuate with events per se or anything like that. It would be, once it's set, and it's these dates, times, and places. Perfect, thank you.
And they could also do the, like Wichita and the rally in the alley, where they consume there, and if the stores did not want the alcohol, or the businesses like a church or a daycare center, they had a blue star on the door, which means you couldn't bring any alcohol in there.
Yeah.
And the same insignia was on the end of the alley, so you couldn't go past that point.
Yeah, one of the things we looked at is reaching out to the businesses and offering them a sticker, basically saying, where we would welcome alcohol, or no, we do not, as part of the district, just to kind of help the businesses out so they're not having to police it as much. But with that, that kind of concludes my questions in the presentation. The next thing is kind of next steps, which is just, does council want to pursue this common consumption permit? This is kind of a new initiative, and so we wanted to kind of gauge your interest on if you would like to do that. And then any guidance on either of the maps that we provided, or if you'd like to propose a different map, this would be the opportunity to do it. Following that, I've already reached out to the business owners and the property owners in the area. I was going to follow up with them again after this meeting and let them know, hey, we've had this presentation, this is the outcome of the meeting, and then sit down with them if there is a will to establish a district, walk them through the parameters, some of the finer details of that. And then we can basically instruct staff to draft an ordinance establishing the district. We've got representatives from the DeSoto Days committee here. DeSoto Days is the last weekend in August, so there is a little bit of time crunch on this. I've talked to the state, and they said, if we can get this to them with 2 weeks' notice, they would be able to process it in a timely manner. So my thought is today we'd have this conversation. We could come back to you at the August 1st meeting with an ordinance, and then send this off to the state and be set up in time for DeSoto Days to operate. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it back over to you.
Step one is just gauge the appetite of the council to have a CCA.
Did Reach Church respond at all?
No, they have not responded. I did drop off the materials, but I have not heard from them. I dropped them off on Monday and have not heard anything yet.
So with that said, is there anyone that is opposed to the development of a common consumption area of of one map or another, some variety in our downtown district? I'm personally not opposed. I think it makes a lot of sense for events or for experiences, I guess. Similar concerns about participation in the vicinity of Reach Church and whether or not alcohol might interfere with what they're trying to do there. But I think that it could be helpful to, that events that would allow movement within the downtown for festivals for one, but just general shopping, a Friday night outing, just to walk and browse the shops that might be open.
I'm open and favorable to it, although I don't think I would be favorable to that map. I think it'd be better to start with the smaller map that also leaves room for the carnival to be outside of the consumption area. That incorporates most of the market type places that occur there, as far as every so often some of the other events. So
that was my thought as well. If we're starting this, maybe let's start with a smaller map, and then we can. It's easy to expand, but once we have it in place, if we don't like it, we'd have to wait a year to.
Are we open to hearing from the DeSoto Days Committee? It looked like someone had a potential comment.
Yeah. Well, I guess I wanted to hear from the council first.
I was just watching facial expressions.
Yeah.
I was like, oh.
If we don't have an appetite for it, there's really not a lot of point going on.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I have an appetite for it. I experienced the challenges we had last year. I think the addition of Force of Nature and some of the other growth downtown, this could be something very positive. I would be in favor of starting with a smaller area.
Thanks.
Yeah, I'm in favor of definitely a small starting area. I was just before hearing all this, I still wonder now why we would include the alleys. I kind of feel like that back area I'm not real crazy about. Personally, you don't need to include the private structure area. I would limit it to the right of way on 83rd Street and then the parking lots, at the corner of Shawnee and 83rd on the three corners over there between WIA and those parking lots. I would start small, just public right of way, so that you could walk out of Force of Nature or walk out of KJ's Pizza or walk down the street with a food vendor.
I'm curious if you need it though to go into, say, Annabelle's. Does her building need to be wholly within the district if you're going to go consume? Because she doesn't have a liquor license.
Do you have to?
Yes.
Oh, so if they don't have the liquor license,
Right.
you can't take it
Right.
in. Yeah, okay. I get that part.
So
I would not be in favor of just open carry through the entire carnival area. I would not be in favor of that.
I don't think the alleyways in the back need to be.
I would not want the alleyways.
we can
That just breeds trouble.
work the map. Danny,
I agree with Kevin.
you're not opposed to the development of
No, not at all.
So the buildings being there, fine, but the alleyways in the back don't need to be.
No, not at all.
Now we can work on refinement and we can
Yeah.
work on hearing from the DeSoto Days group. So,
Good
would you
evening,
mind state your name for the record, please?
Sure. My name is Joe Sabo, 10-year DeSoto resident, first-time council meeting attendee. Thank you. Appreciate it. I think it's important to note, one, I've met with Brandon myself. We sat down a couple of weeks ago. We kind of came up with this idea of this first map here that is up on the screen. Most important note, when we met, we also, in attendance was a representative from ABC. And one of the most important things that we're looking for just in DeSoto Days with a common consumption area is that according to ABC, you can designate a downtown area, and within that area, then we can restrict that area with your guidance and a permit to a smaller area within the designated consumption area. So Rob, with your concern of not having alcohol around the carnival rides and with kids, which is actually one of the requests of the carnival themselves. They are not in favor of having alcohol downtown and around their rides. But according to ABC, once the designated area is set by council, or if it passes, then for separate events, you can limit that area by a designated fenced area, temporary signage, and that's what we've done with DeSoto Days in the past. Last year, although we had to have separated vendors, we had, if you're familiar and saw, we had the orange kind of snow fence that surrounded everything, and we had one way in and one way out to that area. But so what we're really looking for is something to where we can have myself and Rob, we can go get a margarita together, and our wives can get a beer from our beer vendor, and then we can sit in the same area and share those together, to whereas in the past, we've only been able to keep those separate, and you can't stay together. So that's the main purpose that we're looking to come up with and suffice. But I think something like this for downtown DeSoto, I know KJ's is having an event here in just a week or two with a band. And you know, this can be beneficial to other downtown events, festivals. When we've had a stage and a band downtown before, I think this is something beneficial, not for just DeSoto Days, but going forward with future events for the city.
So the intent this year would be to basically combine the two drink vendors into a single or a interspersible area and limit the. We're not looking for common consumption around all the food truck vendors, just mainly at that east end where that margarita and beer vendor were last year. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. And we would also, similar to last year, we would barricade the area with the similar fencing, have proper signage inside and outside of that fence.
Could that include the stage area as well and the seating area around the?
I believe it would include the parking lot of the dentist's office, following the line there to Dale's Service Center. We're actually looking at placing the music stage, which will face to the north in Dale's parking lot this year.
All right.
We're making that move just to satisfy some of the artists and the bands, not to have a 100-degree sun in their face for most of the evening, and also setting it up a little bit different this year will just allow us to maximize our space and open it up a little bit more.
All right. A common consumption area would allow, like, Force of Nature to sell and be able to have people take it out too then.
Right, so they could wander anywhere unless you agreed with Force of Nature that they would also limit where people would go.
Yeah.
So, you know, you certainly could limit yours. And I just had a question. So with the margarita and the beer sales, did DeSoto Days get that permit from the state, or was that the people selling?
That was the private vendors. Each one of the vendors last year, El Patron and Beer 30, applied for their own permits.
So I was talking to Brandon today. I was just putting together the ordinance. So if DeSoto Days got the permit, you just get a temporary permit. You could have those two vendors together, even outside of the common consumption area. You would just need someone from the DeSoto Days group to fill out the application for a temporary permit, and then you could have sort of out of the same bar, basically, or same spot. And with the temporary permit, then you're fully in control of, you know, just like you did last year, you can fence that off however you want, and you wouldn't have to worry about anyone else, like Force of Nature, being in the carnival area. So that's just one thing to consider.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think the issue was the two vendors. My understanding of it was two vendors and how it was structured.
Yeah, if they got the permits through their licensure,
Correct.
then that's probably what caused that. But if DeSoto Days got the permit itself as an organization, which you can do that, that's in the regs, then you're in control of that. You could have them operate out of the same spot.
Okay, so my concern, I think it would be the concern of our vendors and DeSoto Days in general. We are kind of in a little bit of a time crunch as we approach the festival. But I think it's obviously up to you to kind of come up with the best solution, but we believe that this is what would work. And we're open to your guidance.
So I think the common consumption area lends to other events outside DeSoto Days as well.
Agreed.
And it seems like there's uniform interest in the common consumption area, so I definitely actually already prepared an ordinance, so I think that's something we'll move forward on. But if we're running into a time crunch, I'd certainly be willing to talk to you guys about getting that tempered permit so you can make sure your event goes this year. Or maybe we can get the ordinance passed and get the permit through the state, and, you know, there won't be a time crunch. But it does sound like it'll be pretty tight.
Yeah. Yeah, so we talked to the state, and I've kind of kept them abreast of this conversation. They said, you know, as long as there aren't any hiccups, they said 2 weeks would be plenty of time. DeSoto Days is the 27th, 26th?
Yeah, it's starts the last weekend in August, which
holiday weekend
is Labor Day weekend.
Yeah, so we should have enough time as long as ABC is keeping their word, we should have plenty of time to meet that deadline. But yeah.
Any other questions?
Not here. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right, so Brandon, we have answered question one. We've taken input from DeSoto Days. So now we're at guidance on the boundaries. I think we've heard some refinement. Tighten it up to the backside of the buildings on the south. I guess to try just eliminate alleys on the peripheries, right?
Yeah.
Let's keep it more street focused, and then I guess I would want to understand how we actually regulate, say during the DeSoto Days event. What do we need to do to actually restrict the common consumption area to a refined area within this overall boundary?
So it would be a permit for the DeSoto Days. It would be basically layering on top of the common consumption area, if that makes any sense. And so they would basically, wherever they wanted to put that that area, they would just have a special permit.
And we would not have, we say in the future, we have all of this periphery signing, you know, that says, here's where the common consumption area ends. And then we try and restrict within that space in the future. Do you think we would have a problem with that? You know, so we have, say at the edge of the sidewalk there, we are, you know, at 83rd and WIA, you know, we have that boundary set and the other boundary set on the east end, and but we want to refine the area to a smaller area and exclude the center of 83rd Street and everything outside.
I think while we're talking exclusions, the other question would be time frames of.
Yeah.
Because I mean that doing a time frame of between 5:30 and 10, or may be some of the restriction that is enough. It may not be enough, but it kind of comes into that same discussion.
Yeah. Those all things that we would add to permit document, conditions of the permit when we issue a permit for an event that would be held within the common
Yeah,
consumption
yeah,
area.
you would, in the special permit, you would have that, but in the common consumption area, like I said before, council would set those restrictions on the time of when the common consumption area would be open. The, kind of the general consensus of the rest of the state is they, they basically say from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., but you could restrict that to a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, from 5:30 to 10, that's up to council. We would just put that in the ordinance, and then the signs would reflect whatever that would be, and so.
Okay.
And I think the question about, having it restricted, say for an event, wouldn't be the same issue as like Great American Bank would be within the common consumption area, but they may put a star on their door that says you can't come in. So they're excluding themselves even though they're within the area.
Yeah.
Okay.
And is it something we want to start with the smaller area and a smaller time frame of like Thursday through Saturday, 4 to 10? And I say 4 because that's where like some of the Maker's Mart type of events start at 4 type of thing, to where we can always expand it later if it's successful, but it at least kind of starts the area.
The way I was thinking, and the ordinance I started on would, because I'm gonna put it in the city code, but it delegates authority to the city administrator or a designee to come up with the rules, so we're not having to change the city code every time we change something, so that would be something that Mike or Brandon
Me to
could.
make these rules?
Well, it's like the DeSoto Days event's gonna want beer or an alcohol sale from noon, or, right, on Saturday and Friday, right?
Yeah.
Did you want to offer a comment?
Yes, all I was gonna say, I'm Donnie, I have beer 30, I was up there last year, and basically, the reason they had to be separated is because I sold everything below .06. El Patron sold liquor, so therefore they had to have a special permit from ABC. All I had to have was a permit from the city. So you might want to check out the closed consumption area, that it would include liquor also, anything above .06. So anyway, I just thought I'd let you know, that's why we were separated, because he sold liquor and I sold beer, and they wouldn't let us work together. So, anyway, thank you.
All right, Brandon, what are we doing?
Yeah,
What's next?
So I heard Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I heard 4 to 10 on, I'm guessing that would be Thursday and Friday. Did we want to expand? Oh, I'm sorry.
I think he's saying that the city
Yeah.
And I
administrators.
guess the other question that comes to both of you is, what do you need from us
Yeah.
to be able to actually get the application in and approved? Do you need times from us, or with the ordinance written, would ABC approve it with the conditions that Patrick's talking about? So as far as tonight moving forward, to be able to get done in the time frame, what specifics do you need from us at this point?
Yeah, I think just kind of general guidelines of what you would like to see. We can set those regulations.
Boundary?
Yeah, yes. And my thought process would be, and I expressed this to the vendors, that I would come back to them and say, hey, council has decided they would like to do this, and at the next meeting is when we would actually authorize the common consumption area. That way they have a little bit of time to express concern if there was.
Like, what I'm asking though is, if you're coming back next time with a.
Yeah.
We're not gonna have a chance to discuss it fully before then, so it's a matter of what do you need to get that application in?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it would be an ordinance basically establishing.
And boundaries, but
And
not
boundaries.
necessarily
So
time.
the way the boundaries on the ordinance is Exhibit A, so that can just be stuck in. I just have the time as, it's for cereal malt beverage and alcoholic liquor, between the hours. It's only permitted between 9 a.m. and 12 a.m. Sunday through Saturday. So it's a very broad swath, but certainly, and like I said, it delegates, to the city administrator as designee, so, you can
Those
limit it
times
within
are
those.
further refined within that,
Right.
with each permit,
So just
special
because it's in
permit.
the ordinance as that doesn't mean that's what we have to actually keep open.
I'd be in favor of moving forward. I feel like we've got a good sense of boundaries, and then getting some of the input from especially the business owners and property owners in that area before we start you know, deciding if it's Thursday through Saturday, this time to this time, et cetera. You know, who knows, there could be a vision for an event that KJ's or Force of Nature or someone has that would fall on a Tuesday, and I hate for us to, you know, quickly move to restrict something, especially where we don't need that time boundary set for the ordinance. So let's keep moving so we can hit the deadlines for our festival.
Okay, I think that's enough. So I will follow up with the property owners next week, and get some input, and then we'll see an ordinance at the next city council meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Brandon.
Yep.
Thank you to DeSoto Days Committee for being here tonight. Item H, consider ordinance 2621 levying special assessments regarding the sewer benefit district for Astra Enterprise Park.
This should be an easy one. It's simply carrying out what you've already decided. Maximum assessments are being levied by this ordinance, but if the project happened to come in at less money, we would not make those full assessments. It probably won't, but again, this is just the next step in the process.
Okay. Any questions for Patrick on this ordinance?
I make a motion to approve ordinance 2021 as written.
Second.
Sorry, my mistake, my memo said 2021.
It does,
yeah.
It's 2621.
Okay,
Yeah.
I amend
Sorry
that.
about that.
I make a motion to approve ordinance 2621 as written.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Trish,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Michael,
Yes.
McMoran,
Yes.
Lane.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right. No executive session tonight, so we'll go on to advisory reports. Mike?
That's right. Thank you, Mayor. Just one thing, Council. Brad has been busy, as you know, the first part of our agenda was all his items. He's got to remain busy. We have a planning commission meeting next week, and we've been in discussions with a number of single-family residential developers interested in doing projects, some of which you've heard from already, one of which I don't think you have. Interested in increasing density to address affordability issues. And they have requested that we have a look at minimum lot widths in the residential districts. Right now, our minimum lot width essentially is 65 feet. And there's been a desire on the part of the development community to go down to 50 feet to increase density there and help with affordability. It's a step that other communities in Johnson County have done, and Brad has prepared a staff report for the Planning Commission to start considering that, looking at our residential districts. I think we're focusing on maybe not the RO or the R1, maybe but the R2 districts, which allow 2-family and 1-family products with lots as narrow as 50 feet, and there's some setback considerations in there. We just wanted to get the council's opinion on that so that we can kind of report to the Planning Commission on Tuesday that there either was or wasn't any sort of direction from the council on that matter. So just kind of have that question for you.
I think, so in the development world, there have been products similar to this in communities around the metropolitan area for a number of years. And, I think in these times, when one of the biggest factors in the pricing of property is the price of land that it starts with, I think we've got to look at ways to help bring a more affordable product to the market. So I think, for me, I think it makes a lot of sense to have that available.
Yeah, I strongly agree as well. It is, I had asked a couple months ago if we could take a look at our residential development guidelines and look at modernizing them. They largely haven't changed in probably 30 years yet. You know, the development community has changed and the price of housing has changed, and pressure points on affordability, attainability, and housing has changed. So I think it's just a time that we modernize our residential development guidelines. Lot sizes, lot widths, setbacks, accessory dwelling units, and a lot of the things that are being considered right now.
All right.
Fully fully agreed.
Thank you. Rob?
Agreed. And when you look at some of the communities that have used it, like Gardner, with the Grata development and some of the others that have used it, it makes sense and still is able to turn out a quality product.
Any opposition? Danny, any thoughts?
No, I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that, council. That's all I
I
had.
just want to make sure that direction's given.
Very good.
Patrick?
Oh, nothing for me.
All right. I lost my scorecard. It's underneath this paper. Joe, what do you got?
Nothing.
All right. Brandon?
I got nothing.
All right. Brad?
I covered it, we're good.
All right, good. Kevin?
No, sir.
Courtney?
Nothing for me tonight.
Rob?
I won't be here, but the concert and the fireworks Friday night.
Good reminder. Thank you.
Nothing.
Danny? All right. So I'm going to break the trend. I have two things. I'm sorry. One of them is Bob Garrett served on our fire board for many, many years. Bob resigned last week. And we have a position we need to fill for the remainder of Bob's term. So I would like to appoint Dave Anderson to the fire board for the balance. I should have had you prepare a resolution.
Since it's a resolution, I can prepare it after the meeting.
Okay.
It'll be, Brandon, what resolution number will that be?
Oh, you're asking me a question. What is that?
While you're looking that up, what's the balance left on that term?
Are those 2-year terms?
3 years.
So it'd be about 2 years left on Bob's appointment. And we need to get Bob something to thank him for his time on the fire board. Did you get that resolution number yet, Brandon?
I do not have it off the top of my
Okay.
head.
That's all right.
We'll get it.
Is it 2-2? Is it 2622? Right after?
No, that was ordinance.
Ordinance.
We didn't have a resolution.
We didn't have a
tonight,
resolution.
so-
Well, I'll make a motion to approve the next sequential resolution number to appoint Dave Anderson to the remaining term of the fire board.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Tripp,
Yes.
Daniels,
Yes.
Huntermeyer,
Yes.
McElroy,
Yes.
Lane.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, and I have one other item. I've been looking with Brandon and Whitney at well, it's a tool to help us gauge traffic into our community, to gauge the success of the events we hold. So it's a tool that I have better words for it, but so I didn't pull my email up. But basically, it helps us count folks, not an accurate count, but order of magnitude of people that come to the events. It's a product called Placer AI. It uses cell phone app geolocation data. They have a very strong privacy policy. We looked at this program or this product along with 2 other products. I think this one had ease of interface and cost was better than we looked at Replica, which was Replica's very robust, but a higher learning curve, I think, for us to really roll into, and does more than what we probably need it to do for what we want to do now. And then we looked at another one called Data AI. Datafy, not Data AI, Datafy. Similarly, a very strong product, but just that learning curve to get into these all this data and get usable information back out a little less easy to use than what the Placer AI product was. So, but it's a way to get accurate information about where people come from that come to our events, where they go when they leave. It can be used for helping with economic development or chamber pursuits like business loss. So we're bringing people in to work at Panasonic. Where's the first place they go when they leave? Is it the Quick Trip that's 5 miles down the road? Well, maybe we share that with Quick Trip and we can get a Quick Trip here or something, just as an example. But it's help us plan for our community events, plan for perhaps transit at some stage in the future. If we have clusters of people that are coming from somewhere, they can get, we can get that and target solutions to help us down the road. But we're going to have a lot of opportunities, I think, to use this. It is $9,900 a year, so it's not inexpensive, but it is affordable. And I would like to authorize Brandon to go ahead and initiate that contract pending city attorney's review of it with Placer AI to get that started. Let's see how useful we can make this over the first year. So DeSoto Days would be a perfect example. We can see how many people have come to the downtown, where they've come from, so what our draw is from the region, what our draw is from the city, and then share that, and then they know where to advertise, spend advertising dollars next year. So.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with these mobility products as well, and I think it's really good to understand, where do our residents work? Where, in general terms, it's not highly specific in terms of this house to that location necessarily. What's our mobility of our current residents, and then what is the draw for workforce for our businesses? And I think particularly workforce mobility, workforce migration is a real important piece of information that we can get out of it. So yeah, I support it.
The piece I left out was that by acting before the end of August and not waiting for next year's budget cycle, we're saving about $3,000 on the price of the software for the first year. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring it up tonight, was that $3,000 is worth talking about tonight. If we
And I think
it's
while
valuable.
we're headed into a planning process, having that tool available to us as we're heading into an updated planning process, I think would be handy. I like it.
Agreed. For everything from planning to events, and especially as we talk about more kind of placemaking type events, this will only help inform that.
Do we need a motion for that
I don't,
expenditure?
it's within the purchasing authority, so mainly I just wanted to tell you that, I want them to buy something that's about $10,000 and not see it say, hey, when it comes through on the check
Overextending
register.
the mayor's authority?
Right.
I like it.
Okay, all right, and that was it then.
Well, then, Mayor,
Yeah.
you think we could acknowledge our new economic
I was gonna do that, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Tonight, we have Tim Holderson, our brand-new economic development executive, in his first week. You want to come up and say a few words, Tim? You don't have to, I'm just kidding.
No, but you should.
Oh, welcome.
You sat through the whole meeting, you might as well. Well, hey.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. It's great to be with you. Yeah, first week on the job, day 4, I think. Wow, this was fun. I love any meeting that starts out by proclaiming chocolate chip ice cream. I texted some of my old colleagues about that, and they're worried about a protest petition for Butterbrickle. But no, that speaks to my heart for sure. And I love how we're wrapping this up. Placer AI is a powerful tool. I think we can also use it even in retail recruitment and identifying gaps and such. So really excited. This is a great meeting to sit through, and just thrilled to be here, and look forward to working with all of you.
All right,
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Now.
We'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second. All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
This conference is no longer being recorded.
Unless you want it, but I'll take it.
That 3-hour mark.